starting with a female comic artist and woman and growth print culture panel with Lara Caraballo and Mel Gibson. So I got to present very quickly Laura. That is an Argentinian art historian specialized in Latin American comics. In particular, comics of Alberto Breccia and the Argentine comics. And she works in Catalonia, Argentina, and France. And she's the co-organizer of the Eje Transversal del Mal.
The acts of evil.
Yeah, exactly. The working group about female comic in the coast.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pleasure, and whenever you want.
Okay, thank you, Maya. Well, I'll thank again, or like everybody else, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Happy to be here in this place today. A little smell of catastrophe from yesterday. Everything fine. Yeah, so I can. Yes, from here. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about an experience I had this year curating an exhibition on small press, feminist small press history, comics, feminist. Well, there's a lot of adjectives. So as my title, feminist collective activism in South America from a cultural perspective. There's this, but yesterday we were talking with Pablo a little bit about, and in the conference, James conference, about this thing of Latin American comics, which is like a tag, a little, can be a good thing and a bad thing in the same time. It's complicated to say Latin America comics from here. I mean, from Europe territory. Anyways, so in my presentation, I put South America because it's mostly artists from Argentina and Chile, some from Uruguay as well, etc., etc. So let's start. So yeah, before I, which one? Okay, fine. Before I start, we were discussing with Jorge. It's like this talk, these things I'm sharing here are sort of a continuity, mark a continuity with other two events we had. On one hand, we had well, my role in Cost project in comics with Maria Marquez, which is creating this sort of acts, evil acts, acts with the gender perspective. I don't know if we say it like that in English. So we are trying to go like through every working groups and yeah, creating some sort of awareness about the gender problematics in all that sort of go through all the problematics of cost, and especially in authorship problems or questions. So we did this webinar with Maria and about means of productions in feminist comics in Argentina and Spain. So we had a researcher and an editor from Argentina and also 3 artists. And we were discussing about something I will talk about later, which is the appropriation of means of production from minorities like women or other, I don't know, otras disidencias, I don't know how to say that in English. It was a very interesting one, and unfortunately it hadn't been recorded. So it was an ephemeral event. And then we will have this roundtable in the Percor conference this month in Paris. And we're working about this, we were preparing this huge international conference, huge because it was a lot of work, as usual. And it's organized by a group of feminist researchers and artists in France. The name of our collective is Les Brechoises, and we work. We have this common interest, like research on women comic creation and critical reflective work, but also we work in about the role of women in comics history, but we also problematize this invisibilization, systematic invisibilization of women in culture in general. So we are having this roundtable chaired by Viviane Larry, about les autrices de la BD dans l'ère hispano-américain, like common authors. It's same topic I'm talking about today, and it will be a round table with artists, women creators, authors, and so this is like sort of a continuity in between these two events. So I will show you a little bit of this amazing work we did with Pierre-Laurent Dorès and Émilie Favre, feminine exhibition in a festival near Paris, in Noisiel, which is a festival about comics and in the cross of other media and forms of creation. La Ferme de Buisson is a place where the Pulp Festival is organized, and it's a theater. So there are also theater and comics creations. It's a very interesting place for creation. And they asked us to organize an exhibition around like feminism and comics. So we decided to work about this, the feminist publications or women creators publications in history and also in contemporary time. And so we worked also the same cultural areas, the Americas in plural, and also Europe. The exhibition presented historical and contemporary collectives from the same cultural areas, as I said. And I'm going to read some of the creating text we wrote. It was a way to measure the ability of women authors to engage. I'm sorry, I have to say that this is all translations that I did myself, so it's not the quality is not so great from French or from Spanish. So, the ability of women authors to engage with reality through comics and to report on it while distorting it, creating new realities. So we conceived the exhibition as an immersive space. And it was a place where visitors were invited to observe, to read, but also to create, because we create a space of creation, the incubadine, which I will show you later. And the main goal was, of course, to raise awareness around women creators in this civilization and to give space to youngers to express themselves, young persons. So it's a something changed in the, yeah, okay, so I'm gonna move this. It was perfectly displayed in the middle.
Yeah, in your board.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a bit slow.
Yeah, okay. I'll keep talking. So this was a dream came true, like displaying a huge clitoris that was created by the technical team of the La Ferme de Buisson. They do scenography, so they are very good at this kind of creating this kind of objects, big objects. So it was like this huge clitoris. And we put it there as a symbol, of course. It's an organ specific to the female body and to people with vulva in general. And it becomes a fundamental symbol on the path of emancipation. It was systematically erased from scientific discourse for centuries. It was only described in anatomy books at the end of the 90s, which is crazy. Invisibilized because of its role in female and body's pleasure and its lack of connection to procreation. It has only recently been brought into the public arena. This organ represents a body emancipated from the mandate of gendering, I don't know if you can say that like that, and governed by the individual and intimate decision. So this was the entrance of the exhibition. This was very important for us because intimacy and physicality have a political dimension, of course. As Carol Hanisch argued in the context of the woman liberation movement in the 60s, this idea runs counter the modern binarism in which the public area is identified with the political and the masculine, while the private, domestic, and depoliticized sphere is associated with the feminine. In departing from this formula, we abandoned this idea and realized that the body and desire are subject to social and cultural determinations and oppressions. So in the transition from the private to the public sphere, alliances between women position them politically, leading them to transform reality. So this is one of the starting points of the exhibition. And I put this amazing image from Jackie Fleming, like first a woman living the domestic sphere. So, well, there's other things about feminism that we were trying to explain to the public, which is like feminism is neither stable or unified, like this is what a clear thing in the exhibition. And the fact that the point of convergence, like that, as Judith Butler said, but also the Simone de Beauvoir heritage, it's that of the evidence of the crisis of the category of woman as a determination prior to the existence of bodies, as we all know. So I wanted to transmit the importance, first that this was a personal choice or individual one. I wanted to show the importance of the collective work in Latin America, in South America, feminism in creation, but also in a political fight, which in the end is the same for me because it converges completely. I forgot the name of del director del Espacio de Cómic en Chile. No, que estuvo hablando ayer. Perdón, son los nervios. Claudio, sorry. Claudio was talking a little bit about this, about creation and political fight, which is at some points it becomes the same. So we presented the space of the exhibition as a tide of paper. It was like paper all over. In reference to the concept of Marea Verde, which is a South American, Latin American concept, green tide, which is the new feminism, post-colonial feminism. And we say tide because it's much bigger than a wave. So this is the main idea. So we use this concept of the tide of paper, of ink. We had also, of course, some screens, but not too many. We try to limit them as much as possible. So one of the things that gathered feminism fights all around the continent, South American, Latin American continent, it was the fight to legalize abortion, of course. But this huge tide, I think, really started with demonstrations against femicide. Femicide, we say like this in English, femicide. Femicide. So it was like against femicide, which like completely grotesque in Latin American countries, but all over the world as well, in 2015. So the struggle grew a lot. And with this seek to women to the woman rights to decide about their own bodies. So I decided to create this green room, which is you see in the end. This was a little house because the festival takes place in an old farm, in an ancient farm, and this is a small house in the farm. So it was very nice because it creates a parcours, un recorrido. Sorry, recorrido in English, a tour. Yeah, sort of a tour. And the end in the first floor, the end of this was the green room. And sorry, here there was the slogan of the national campaign of right, legal, safe and free abortion from Argentina, which we repeated like so much in all over, like the media and social media and demonstrations and manifestations. Educación sexual para decidir, anticonceptivos para no abortar, aborto legal para no morir. So the legalization of abortion was one of the great deaths of Latin American democracies. Abortion now is legal, very recently, it's legal in a few countries, like including Argentina from 2020, Chile and Colombia this very year, Mexico last year, and Uruguay since 2012. Uruguay is always like a step ahead from everybody else. But the exception to this rule is it's Cuba, which the abortion was legal since 1961, thanks to the revolutionary government. So this huge movement was organized movement that were fighting for legal, safe, and free abortion has won the battle in these few countries, thanks to its tireless activism. This is what brought the law. It was like social movements that brought that got into the Congress. This is not. There's also, of course, political voluntad política, but it's mainly because of the pressure of these social movements. And of course, comics and graphic art are a privileged channel to deal with these issues and raise awareness of their social importance, as Claudio said, Claudio was saying yesterday when he was talking about the social movements in Chile since like the last years. So the symbols of this movement that first started in Argentina are the green color triangular scarf, like the one used by Madres Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, which are groups that are universally recognized as examples of peaceful struggle for human rights today, of course, and just as they were a political actor in the resistance against the Argentinian dictatorship in the early days. So it was a huge inspiration for feminists because there were women. They were the only ones in the streets in dictatorships, in dictatorship times. So the green room displayed, and we finally arrived to the green. I'm sorry, I'm going a little slow because the English is not, I'm not used to. So we display graphic creations from several South American artists. I think there was a few Mexicans in there, so we can say Latin America. Mostly coming from posts in social media that participated in this abortion debate that lasts for a few years, and it's still going on in other countries. And I think it's the next one. No, this iconic picture photograph of a hand holding a green scarf in front of the Argentinian National Congress, where the law was eventually voted. And we also had this to create like a dialogue with the French reality. We displayed this roman photo or photo novel. Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday with Paul. But this one is based on a movie, so it's extract from a film, L'une chante, l'autre pas, from Agnès Varda. That was also a way to raise awareness about abortion at the time abortion was legalized in France in the 70s. So this photo novel was published in Anana magazine in 1977, and Anana was one of the first publications made entirely by women and with women artists. Also with some publications, of course, in the United States in the 70s. So, okay. So I'll move forward. We wanted to create a sensation of overwhelming, as I said before, this type of paper to show the huge amount of female creation, woman creation. And we also displayed a wall of femme, which was all the names of about 200 artists that were present in the exhibition. I don't have a picture of that. And I will show you the creation of a few collectives in Argentina. This was one of the most important things, like how women gather to appropriate as I said before, the means of production. And there's some amazing experience. This is the Orowaki sensation. We cannot really feel it in a picture, but it was very, very oppressive in there. And it was like what we were looking for. Before I show you briefly the Incubadin, this was a space that we created so visitors could take inspiration from all the fanzines that were displayed in this library, and also they have a photocopy machine and paper and material. So they were it was super. At the time of the festival, it was 2 days. It was crazy. All these younger, but very young persons that came there and left us all sort of different creations. Some of them made some fanzines, and others just images or messages for us. And there was, so this is a few pictures of this space, which was really amazing. And this one it was a few that were super funny. And this was where I thought it was very, very funny. Qui a peur du gros clito? Who's scared of the big clitoris? I was dialoguing with the exhibition space. So I don't have much time, but I also brought for you to see the things in paper. I want to talk about three collectives, 3 publications, and 1 festival that you may know because James had a few visuals yesterday. So if you wanna, so I'm not going to talk too much about this, but we can. How can I say that the main problematic is here is a collective work. It's about this is Clitoris, a publication which had comics, illustration, but also theoretical and text and essays. This is from 2011, so it's one of the it's a precursor. We say like that, precursor to precursor. Precursora. Well, anyways, I think you all understood what I tried to say, because at this moment the feminist agenda wasn't so present in the public arena, and there were no publications or very few. There was some others, like yesterday James mentioned Chicks on Comics, but this was very interesting because it was directly problematizing this feminist agenda. So it's an amazing publication. They have I think they have 3 issues and 2 books. But I'm going to go very fast. Brigida is another great product from Chile. And this represents exactly this thing of appropriating the means of production. Huh? It's self created, and it was publishing houses that were like spontaneously created to show women creators and to treat these subjects that didn't change at all since 40 years. We see the same thing in Anana, which is a magazine from the end of the 70s. It's the same problems, exactly the same problems. It's like nothing changed. The time didn't pass. I don't want to be so, okay, it's not exactly like that, but if we see the publications, like, oh, fuck. Well, here we have also the symbol, the body parts symbol. Here is the breast. The message is like we need to desexualize them, so we can be in the beach without bikini, and we are like any other man. So this is a strong symbol, I think. And Feminietas, which is a journal. It's like a tabloid format. You have one issue or two in there, which is in between Argentina and Catalonia. It's also a super interesting adventure, and they have like thematic issues. Well, I will wrap it up. Vamos las Pibas, which is a festival, a super interesting festival that started like a very small thing, small gathering, and took some importance. And there is like 10 editions now. And they have a publication with a selection of art that is presented in the festival. So they have this manifest. If you're interested, I can send you the PDF of this if you want to see like content. And Vamos las Pibas, it's the last edition. It's happening this weekend in Buenos Aires. So it's pretty funny. So thank you. that would be it. Sorry for my French.
Now is the time of Mel Gibson. That you want to write it? Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to set up the slides, but just to say thank you so much for inviting me to come along. It's been a huge honor and a privilege, and I found it all fascinating and often very moving. It's just such a shame I haven't been able to come to every paper, but I've learned a tremendous amount, so thank you all. What I'm talking about today is kind of the femininity end rather than the feminist end in terms of collections that are out there. Is it possible to get the slides swapped? Is that okay? Yeah, how do I, from here, where do I?
Right.
Okay. Yep. That one. Just save, or not, don't save. Don't save. And then get rid of, no. Better help me. Yeah.
Maybe here.
Because when I start tinkering with technology, it's almost as if there's a gas somewhere going, you know, you have to leave the room. I have a talent for blowing things up.
Is it plugged in? Right?
Yeah. But yes, so I'll start anyway. I've spent a lot of time working with various organisations in Britain, helping to develop comics events, and you've just reminded me of a lovely exhibition that a group of us from Newcastle and Northumbria universities wanted to get off the ground, but it absolutely coincided with the start of COVID. So we were about to open and everything went into
Now,
shutdown.
is this the correct one?
This is the correct one. It was going to be about different generations of feminist cartoonists in the UK. And we had people lined up. We hope maybe to get it off the ground again. We'll just have to wait and see what actually happens. So I've also been involved with archives, and this is partly what I'm going to talk about today. Where are archives of this material in Britain? There are a few locations, but what's happened is that the girls' material has tended to be lost, neglected, seen as ephemeral. It's that point at which childhood and comics intersect, and somehow certain groups, of course, fall into this space. And that's happened a lot with girls' comics in Britain. One, which I've worked with for years now, is called Femorabilia, sort of like memorabilia, to play on that term. And that's 20th century girls and women's magazines. So some of it's comics, some of it's more mainstream. So there's a real mixture actually there. So that's one that I'm going to talk about a bit as we go along. The Glasgow Women's Library is another sort of major site, and it focuses on its more achievements and activities of women. So it's much more about feminist activism. And it's got a lot of zines. It's got magazines such as Spare Rib, which was one of the sort of iconic British feminist texts. And it's got a few girls' annuals, and brought one from the 1950s along today. So every year, something like this would be published to go along with a comical magazine. And it would have a mixture of comic strip, that's lettuce leaf, and ordinary text narratives as well. So that was the sort of gift that an auntie would give you or something. So you get one of these, very durable, they last well. So some collections like that in Glasgow Women's Library has a holding including that material. The London School of Economics has got the Women's Library Archive, which also is very much about feminist activism, as well as the LGBT archive. But it's been Femorabilia that I've worked with most. Let's see. Try with the mouse. Oh, it's stuck. Hey, there's loads of stuff in the British Library, but you've got to know where to find it. And it's all buried deep. And I worked for a little while in the Victoria and Albert Museum Library, and a lot of the things like comics tended to be stolen quite often. Small, portable, fragile. So it was quite an interesting job, really. But there's an awful lot in private hands of these kind of girls' materials specifically. And there are people who are fans, some academics and fans. So Jenny Scott and Misty Fan talk about a type called Ginty in particular. And there's girls' comics of yesterday. So there's an awful lot of this kind of personal work. So not attached to institutions, but where individuals are trying to make sure this history isn't lost. One of the biggest problems with a lot of British comics for girls is that the publishers didn't allow the artists or writers to have their names on their work. So the minute, once it's out there, once it's published, that information is gone. And one of the major publishers who published, amongst other things, this Bunty, which was the longest lived of the British girls comics, lasting from the late 1950s to the early 2000s. The publisher there had a flood and lost its main text, which had the records of who'd done the work on Bunty. So a lot of the work that's going on is individuals going, well, do you recognize this artwork? And of course, the artists were from all over Europe. There were a lot from Spain, from Greece, from Portugal, who contributed to these works. So although on the one hand, they're very British, they're actually European in terms of who's participating, who's contributing. But again, that information, unless people can recognize the art, is lost. It's only recently, for instance, that the cover artist of this, and I cannot remember her name, although I have it down somewhere, we discovered this was a female artist who created nearly every one of the Bunty cover stories from the start of the title on. So that's a huge body of work, but no names, no knowledge. So you can see how easy it is to lose this material. So what a lot of us are doing who are involved with this kind of text in the UK is what Abigail de Kosnik describes cultural memory as rogue archive, one that preserves the performative nature and the political potential of popular culture. So that's kind of what a lot of us are trying to do. Oh, next. Yes, but Femorabilia is the one that I got involved in. It's based actually at Liverpool John Moores University. I tried for years to get Northumbria, my university across the road, on board, but no, didn't work out. And my dear friend Nicky Ann Moody, who has passed away, was one of the small team working on this collection, which began in actual fact with fashion magazines. So unlikely. And they said, well, what we want to do is make sure that this mainstream reading culture isn't lost either. So we've got some homes, as it were, for the feminist material, for the activist material. But we also wanted to try and go, well, let's find out what's going on with this mainstream stuff. Because as you know, it's often as pointed about what the attitudes a particular society has at a particular time and the ways it attempts to chaperone girls reading. and there was the other word you used. Oh, it's gone. Script, yes. These are texts that tell girls quite a lot what to do, but they don't necessarily tell one what you might expect. And that's what I'm really interested in, is the fact that even in the supposedly most conservative or high cultural of these texts, there is buried within it different ways of thinking. You know, they had to make sure it was acceptable for the parent who might share it, but also offer enough to the girl to maintain their interest and engagement. So as Nicky Ann wrote, it's a contribution to ensuring that female reading culture does not get lost. And the exhibition's about contributing to the recovery of this culture. Come on, you rotten thing. Technology hates me. Let's try with that one. Why I'm involved? I was lucky for a while. They gave me money. Liverpool John Moores said, take some money and go and buy things. And there's a very important private collector who is probably, what happens to that collection is going to be very complicated, I think. But I spent a very happy day in his barn, sourcing about £3,000 worth of material from the 1950s and 60s, including some of these, which is rather glorious. This is from that girl from 1960. It's got an instruction. The title is an instruction because it was published alongside Robin, which was for little children, Swift, which was for taking off readers, and Eagle, which was for boys. And what do you get? Girl, know your place, know your role. So it's an instruction. Most of the others actually had the names of girls. So Bunty in this context is known as a British girl's name rather than an actor's name. So we've got all of that going on here. So I ran staff training, which was great fun because we all started to discover what we had in common, because you put a pile of comics in a room with people, they find ways of making links, don't they? Because this is object elicitation at its best. I got involved in promotional events. We ran something with the whole of the city of Liverpool, because the hope was with the Femorabilia collection that it would be available, accessible to the general public, not simply a research archive, although the research was absolutely central to it. And much to our amazement, we discovered, for instance, that one of the radio presenters in Liverpool had a male, older gentleman, had a huge collection of teenage girls' comics. And we said, well, why? What's the draw? And he said, it's the only place you find out about the bands in the 1950s and 1960s, the music, the bands that lasted the shortest amount of time. They'd be there, they'd be nowhere else. So from his point of view, as well as loving the art of the comic strips, he was fascinated in the paratexts, because that was supporting his work. So Femorabilia exists for future researchers, and it's absolutely about emphasizing voices which has tended to be lost or neglected. So, you know, it's about not losing this girl's history. Nearly all of these titles had exchanges with their readers. People would send in letters on a huge range of subjects. Indeed, Girl had what was quite an early agony aunt column, which covered everything. The person who published this, the editor-in-chief, was the Reverend Marcus Morris, a very muscular Christian gentleman from the south of England. But nonetheless, this was a space in which girls would write and say, I'm having this problem. It could be anything from how to deal with sweaty palms when dancing together, holding dancing, but also they dealt with questions about abuse, questions about shyness, questions about pregnancy. Usually, you know, if you sent in an envelope, they would send a return to the reader. So this was one of the main ways in which you gained information as a girl that was personal, private, safe, comparatively. So this is the way that was done. So let's press this button and hope. What have I been looking at lately? Something very unlikely. It's actually ballet. And that's been a surprise for me. And you might think, oh, what's that? How does that fit? Ballet looks so traditional, it's so formal, it's high culture. But what's interesting is when I've been looking at Girl, did a sample read of 50 of these, and half a dozen of these, and some companion volumes, a very odd picture began to emerge about what ballet was, in part created by a rather interesting gentleman called Arnold Haskell, who basically rewrote ballet history in Britain, not single-handedly, but as a very small group of people who positioned themselves as connoisseurs and reproduced ballet as high culture, whereas previously it had been part of music hall, variety theatre. You'd have a juggler, you'd have a ventriloquist, and then you'd have the ballet girls. And instead it became opera house. And it was characterized as having arrived. So ballet suddenly has no history in the 19th century. It is in the 20th century when the Russians appear in Britain. That's when British ballet begins, was the narrative that they created. And Girl, in the 1950s, becomes part of this new narrative. And it tells you, the reader, how you really ought to think about what this is, but also to think about your place as a participant, because it's all about participatory culture. So it's about the ballet business. The narratives aren't about performance. And I'm going to show you some, I promise. And it's ballet history as rewritten and the celebrity culture. So this is kind of what it looks like, ballet fiction in Girl. You'd have the stories, it was 1 page a week. I have a page here, as well as the ones up there. So a page a week, a dozen or so panels usually. And the stories could go on for 25 to 30 weeks. This is a huge commitment in terms of reading. But what does it tell you about ballet? This narrative's actually called Keeping the School Going. It's not about anything on stage. All of the narrative is behind the scenes. Madame Orenska, the person who is in charge of the school, goes off to Russia for additional training, leaving, in theory, her nephew in charge. He does not appear. And suddenly, Belle of the ballet and her friends spend their time going around trying to find a new teacher. So they go to the places that they're meant to go, all of the establishment places, lightly fictionalized, including this sort of Royal Academy of Drama and Dance, not its real name, obviously, but close, where they get immediately an interview with the director, which I think is the most fanciful piece of this entire narrative, but do not find a teacher. So this quest for the teacher, this idea that it's all about, well, we need to practice, we need someone to help discipline us, we need to develop our ballet bodies, we need to have this poise, we wish to perform. All of that is instilled through the whole of the narrative. And through this really interesting group of friends American, Chinese, and English, who are the dancers. So they're always together. One of them is also a male dancer. So it's making that point too, that yes, you may all wish to be prima ballerinas, but there are many other roles that you can fulfill. Because what Girl, the comic, did best of all was actually careers narratives. So this is 1950s and into the early 1960s, very much about the performance of femininity in the ballet, but like the other narratives, it's actually about what kind of career can you have. So it's as close to realism as it's very realist fiction. It says what the disciplines are, what you should aspire to, how you should think about it. I love in the one on the far left, there's a huge thought balloon, which is a whole panel, where the young people who've been complaining about, oh, all we do is make the tea. All we do is scrub the pots. And one of them says, and sit around looking beautiful. So they decide, they invent a ballet based on that. And this is the first fanciful imagining of that ballet. So it interacts with the real world. I love this line. They train ballet teachers here. They've got to have a spare one. So that's, again, slightly fanciful. But it then says, all the graduates are either fixed up with jobs, getting married, or starting their own schools. So again, it's not saying there's an immediate feminine trajectory that is going to inevitably end in marriage and stepping away from work, even at a point where that was typical. It's offering the possibilities. So here we have a bit about the actual history, where they say, we've got to visit a music hall. Oh, the things we have to do. And this is again about that rewriting of ballet history. So it's seen as unfamiliar. And as Taylor says, the ideological mission of British ballet was the business of creating a history and therefore rewriting what was already there. And saying ballet is not a single text, but it's a battle really over claims as to what it is. So what it looks like and what it is are very different. This is another rather gorgeous story. I'm particularly fond of the page at the far right-hand side. Some really lovely work. It starts with the image of the static ballerina, but in actual fact, what it is sort of investigating a mystery. So again, it's about activity, it's about agency, it's about girls as participants. The two girls, Mamie and Belle, are en point when they discover somebody dancing in another room, but it's only when they're on the toes that they can actually see even part of this person's body. So ballet is part of an investigative narrative. This isn't ballet non-fiction. And this too is very instructive because what it tells you what to do is join ballet classes, read seriously about ballet, and Girl actually ran its own ballet scholarship for people who couldn't afford the fees. So you're encouraged to participate and see yourself as a professional. You, Margot Fontaine, best friends. So it's about connoisseurship. They don't use the word fan very much. They've got the Girl Adventurers Club, but this is what you've got to do if you're the reader. You've got to take on board the revised history of British ballet, its true history, that there's an elite and a London focus, that it's a middle class and aspirational activity, not as it had been seen in the 19th century, which was if you show your legs on stage, what might you show off stage? And it is positioned like that. Participate at amateur level, aspire to professional level, see oneself as a connoisseur and take it seriously. And most importantly, see it as more important than other art forms. So there's an awful lot going on in terms of this text, both directing the reader and directing Girl's aspirations, but it ends in work. So even in the most mainstream of titles, there's something really interesting going on, as we know. So I will now shut up and sit down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel, for this amazing presentation.
That's all right. Thank you.
Really interesting. And we start immediately with the questions. So if there's someone with question for Laura or Mel. Joe?
So thank you for both these presentations. These were super interesting. This question is for Laura. So I noticed in Brigida and in some of the other texts that you mentioned, sometimes there's a struggle with trans-inclusive language. Where's Laura? You should tell that. Oh, hi. Hi. I noticed that sometimes there's a struggle with trans-inclusive language. Would you just talk a little bit about how important trans-inclusive language is at this moment for this community? Is it something that you sense is a high priority, or do you feel that there are other battles that are being fought first? And what kinds of answers are they coming up with to the challenge?
Wow, what a question. Thank you for the question. Yes, I think it's tricky because we have there's how to prioritize the problems, and there's like a big problem, and which is the dying. Actually, the life of all these people is in danger. So this is a very important problem, but we also have a battle in the symbolic area. I'm sorry, it's hard. And the language is a very big one, and this causes so much resistance. Well, but it depends on the country, because in other language, in Spanish, we do this changing the a or e or o for the e, and it works pretty well when we're talking. So, but it's of course it's bothering a lot the people, because it's a way to also appropriate the language. So I think both battles are priority, because one, like they're like connected in between them. One thing that happens in South America, in Argentina especially, that I see is that the use of the inclusive language is it's like gaining spaces. It's very democratized, let's say it like that. And there is a big fight in the public arena, I think, going on in this sense. And I think it's something we should defend, like in the everyday life. It's like a small gesture, which can like transform reality, because this is one of the things I was seeing, that in comics, it's a way to really transform reality, because when we see how it works, like mostly in events and festivals, people come and see, and it creates something that can transform reality. It can sound a little like dreaming of a perfect war, but it's something that is happening. So the symbolic aspect it's very important, as well as the other one, which is like but it's the only way to transform actually the reality of us being seen as objects and being killed, for example. I don't know if I answered I answered your question.
Yeah, I think that answers it. When you are looking at all of these different people creating zines or exhibits, have you seen any interesting strategies for dealing with this challenge?
With the challenge
of the trans-inclusive language. So I'm just thinking, for example, Brigida is called Revista de Cómic Hecho por Mujeres. So I'm wondering, like, even that looks like a place where they haven't tried to include trans-inclusive language. Have you seen somebody else maybe making a new comic and they came up with some better terminology, or have you seen any successes? That's my question.
I don't know if I see successes, it's tricky to say, but it's like a big problem for feminism. That's why I identify with trans feminism, because feminism itself, it's like reproducing the binary problem. So it's a big debate, and I worked about Latin America and Argentinian comics, but I live in France. I've been in France for a long time, and there's where they pay for my research. And it's I think we have more. I'm going to try to answer your question with a general answer. But talking about, I don't know if comics specifically, but publications, the frame, like the epistemological frame, I don't know if for Brigida, it's more like a classical feminist approach, but for others like Clitoris, they have more of frame, like we cannot have a feminism without, there's this slogan, el feminismo sin trabas no es feminismo, and it's like feminism is not feminism with trans persons, but they use, this is very hard to explain, they use the word trava, which is an emancipatory appropriation of the term trava, which is ¿cómo se dice un término despectivo? Can you help me? Exactly, traba. It's so, well, I don't know if I made my point, but this slogan is very strong because we say that we cannot be feminist without this integration. And there is some comics that use like the metaphor of animals. I think right now with one of them, Femutancia. I don't know if maybe it's in one of the publications, which is problematizing this problem very interesting. But I think it has to be said a lot to explain this problematic of a binary feminism or a trans feminist. I don't know. I'm behind the screen.
Agatha?
Hello.
I have to.
No funciona, Agatha?
I have a question for Mel. In ballet story, are there any graphic innovations in the representation of female bodies?
There is very much a representation of the ballet body, as in trained, slender, and that is repeated. They're usually seen wearing their training clothes. The journal I've actually been asked to write for is the Journal of Film, Fashion and Consumption. I'm not a good fit with that, but they asked me to talk about the costuming. And for the most part, it's civilian clothing and the training outfits. And you tend not to see the body in fixed positions in the sort of, that kind of ballerina icon is very much not part of the narrative. In one of the examples I showed, there was just one tiny little image next to the title. But that image changes according to the story. So you don't get performance bodies for the most part. You get active bodies, fit, healthy bodies moving. But the focus is also on the male body as a part of spectacle as well. So there's an interesting balance that they're trying to achieve in terms of the text. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Jonathan?
Yes, we know about the sales of the film against boys.
they sold pretty well in actual fact. The bestsellers sold regularly between 800,000 and 1 million a week. So they weren't a patch on the humor comics like the Beano and the Dandy that at peak, I think, were selling several million a week at least. And the thing is, for now, a guy called George Pumphrey in the 1950s and 1960s, who was part of the British anti-comics campaign, which was a huge one. They looked at Frederick Wortham and went, we're with him. But what he actually did was, as with Wortham, although he skewed the data he got, he taught quite a lot to young people and discovered for every copy sold, there were up to half a dozen readers. So the numbers could be quite remarkable. And probably the biggest seller because of post-Second World War paper rationing was School Friend, which definitely did about 1 million a week at one point. So they were known. Something like this one was sort of selling in the low hundreds of thousands, but that's because of the sheer cost. That's 4.5 pence when the Beano cost a penny. It varies. To be honest, it's the humor comics that are the most popular of all of them. The boys and girls tend to be fairly well balanced in terms of sales. Probably the bigger titles were the ones that converted from being, oh, hang on, I'm off now, stop me. A lot of these titles started as story papers in the 1930s, and post the Second World War, some of them went all the way into comics, and others did a slow movement towards including comic strips. And those ones that had the longer history tended to hang on to readers more because parents would more readily buy them for their children. And something like this, because of the cost, this is middle class incarnate. So you buy this to say, this is what I'd like you to be when you grow up. A bit more. So there's an awful lot about sort of ideologies. I mean, Bunty at this point, this is the 1980s, and this costs all of 12 pence, 12 new pennies. So that's actually quite comparatively cheap, but you can see it's shown in how it's made. So there's the materiality of the text interests me. So there's some big circulation. Both boys and girls comics collapsed really in terms of circulation, slowly but surely. And we're left with the remnants, Beano, 2000 AD, which is a much later start anyway. And then some new arrivals like the Phoenix. But an awful lot of the work is now for creating graphic novels as the first port of call rather than a weekly or monthly publication. So the entire nature of the business has sort of shifted really. And there's a big influence of manga. I mean, the sales of manga just.
Yeah. It seems a lot of the things that died out of the internet, they were important. A lot of that. You've been researching, they tended to die out as the internet increased. So has a lot of that work, has that shifted to the internet now? Is it more of a digital medium, that kind of content?
But I don't like it here because I have it on screen. I think we, at some point, we had the impression that was decreasing, like the paper production and everything were going to the internet. But I think paper is, artists are rediscovering paper all the time. And there's some collectives that are really exploring the paper, and there's a lot of production. I don't know if it's, I think it's also present, very present, the paper back there. There's this collective Invoca Lupo from Rosario in Argentina, and they do an amazing work with paper, and it couldn't exist in the same way. It's like the materiality still has an importance, But it's true that we can find all sorts of things in digital, and we can do very simple things and send them to circulate so we have a massive amount of visual stimulation and visual channels to express. But I think paper still, or maybe at some point, a few years ago, it decreased a little, and then I think there's like this renovation of or coming back to photocopies or these things that now are like sort of vintage or like riso, I don't know how to say that in English, risografia.
Yeah, risography. And yes, it's more underground style.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Self-publishing.
Yeah.
I think that is an international movement about self-publishing. Also in Italy, in the last decade, there is a rediscovering of self-publishing, also because there, maybe not now, because the price of the paper is going crazy, but like there was more easy, more accessible to print, and also to organize like your layout with program, software, etc. So it's more easy to accessible to the self-print, self-publishing in general. In Bocca al Lupo, by the way, is Italian.
In Bocca al Lupo is Italian name, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Eva.
I actually had a question for the both of you of the effect of this material. In your case, Laura, do some of these women artists, if I can call them women artists, talk to you about the effect of their zines, collectives? And in your case, Mel, are you thinking about, we all know your book with Leuven University Press, are you thinking about taking this ballet research, if I can call it like that, sorry, into also from the perspective of the audience? What was the effect? I was thinking of Carol Tilley did a really nice presentation a couple of months ago, and she was researching based on the latter's papers what people did, what jobs afterwards, because they were sending in drawings. You could research what people, of course it's a horrendous job to do, but who actually became a prima ballerina, or what were the jobs, or what effect it had. That was my question.
I think there is no, these kind of productions circulates in a, unfortunately, I think there is a sort of an endogeno, translating, like a closed universe. It's not, I don't know, I would say it's not massive. But an interesting thing is that this cross-media reality of cultural consummation right now, bring a lot of people that don't know comics to buy this or to have access to these publications, which are mostly comics. So I think it spreads beyond the comic sphere, but in terms of the message, it really circulates. It's I think most of the people that have access to this are sensitive to this question. So I don't know how at what point it leaks like in other. It's hard to say, because myself I'm in a sphere in a closed sphere, but it's true that the impact it has in people that are sensitive to this kind of problematic is very interesting, because in these representations they can see things that are not completely mainstream, and that I can bring them to have some sort of reflection or yeah, questioning their own identities and all these kind of things. And I saw this in festivals and in conventions, like people that comes, and there's a lot of also these spaces of conventions and festivals are very rich and intense spaces for people that are sensitive to these problematics. But it stays, I think, in a sort of yeah, it's closed mostly, yeah.
With the ballet, there were a lot of letters to the editor, so much so that periodically he would complain about the ballet enthusiasts wanting more pin-ups of ballerinas, wanting more stories, so that you get a sense of the interaction, which is fascinating in itself. They had some say and input into the narratives. In terms of career, the girls' scholarship scheme only eventually, I think, it had one prima ballerina, but to be honest, that's a huge deal anyway. And nearly everybody else who won that scholarship ended up in a corps de ballet somewhere. So that small group of folk involved in that competition did go on to become professionals. So I've got a sighting of it, just vaguely as yet.
I have a question, well, a comment, yeah, something I would like to discuss with you, Mel. Great that you are here, because in iCOn-MICs we are working with these transversal acts. We're working about autoras, like author, woman author, with just in capital A. Autoras, editoras, editors, and also readers, lectoras. But it's something that we want to explore, but we didn't really start it. We are thinking like, we have to have some sort of thinking or reflection of what happens with women authors, readers. Sorry, and I find very interesting what you do, because myself, I have the same thing when we work with comics that have an impact in reality, and we'll try to think about these things or to theorize about these problematics. It's very problematic too, because we can have a lot of, sorry, I will get to the point. Please be patient. We can speculate about the effects of the comic, and we have a lot of tools to do this. We can do this, and it can be legitimate. But we also have the aspect of reader studying and reader studies, and it's much less. It's always like less explored in many cultural manifestations. So I find your work very interesting. I don't know what is your.
I knew I was getting myself into trouble when I started looking at memory, because people say absolutely correctly that it's slippery and that we change our autobiographies as we go along. What was interesting about working with girls' comics is it was such a lost history that if you actually put one of these in front of somebody, you would get this astonishing, it was a rush of memory. It was immediate. It wasn't, you would have people arguing about who the characters' names were. And all of those all their adultness disappeared just briefly. And then they kind of pull it all back and go, no, we don't go there now. But they would have moments of pure joy. And it was actually, I get weepy, because it was so amazing to watch people change into another version of themselves. And it was the object elicitation that did it. People talk about how this paper felt. So quite a few of the people I interviewed loved Bunty. And they said, because the paper felt lovely. It was warm and soft. It wasn't hard and shiny paper. And so, again, at the level of materiality, so you never quite know what you're going to get. What I've been experimenting with recently, which is probably quite evil of me, as part of a project called Girl Kind, is bringing older texts to younger generations. So, but having, if they're teachers and librarians, if they're coming to the Girl Kind events with an accompanying adult, then we'll share them. And what we found is that this is really good for opening up intergenerational talk, So most of these events are quite focused. So we'll do something on agony aunts, problem pages. And suddenly it will be, oh, was it like that when you were young? Oh, really? Did you have that kind of problem? Did you have friends who were bullies? Oh, really? Suddenly there's that conversation. So there's something about the shared historical object that can start this new form of discussion. So door opening, as a lot of the papers have said about different histories, political histories, all of these things. How do you start that conversation? And of course, when you're talking about an object, you're not necessarily bearing your heart, but what you are doing in sharing that physical space and readerly space is starting to make connections in different ways. So they're the ways that I'm playing with this at the moment, carefully.
Yeah.
Tanya?
Yes, thank you, Laura and Mel, for such wonderful presentations. I definitely intend to incorporate it into my teaching. Now in the US, as you know, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade that made in 1973 a constitutional right for women to have abortions. And right now in the US, there is a huge tension, especially, for example, between universities and this kind of thinking that is definitely setting back all the advances that we had, that legal right that is being just lost. And it seems like they are preparing also to try and overturn also gay marriage. I mean, all the things that were achieved after so much social activism and everything, we are seeing that we are losing that. We are seeing, for example, that board of trustees are denying professors in women and gender studies tenure because they don't think that we should have a gender and women studies department, because what are you doing there? You know. So I definitely plan to include this in a comment that what I was thinking when you were talking about in Latin America, how we are seeing that we are making advances in this, and yet in the US, something that we thought that was right there to stay, that we had the right, and now is simply gone. And that is right now, I see it among our students, for example, there is this tremendous fear among young women. What's going to happen? What happens if I become pregnant? What happens? I mean, and so thank you, because I will definitely incorporate this into my teaching. And students really appreciate this kind of, when they see that it's something that they can touch, that's something that is actually being done, right? So thank you so much for all that I wanted to say.
Yeah, I wanted to add something. That, yeah, this kind of material is very interesting, these comics, because when we were talking with about gender language, and some of these comics I know for a fact that help people in their gender transformation, for example. So it's also, and these people, like I have a few témoignages and mixed languages.
You say it in Spanish.
Testimonios, sorry. Testimony from people that were like cherishing this object because it's a way the material aspect of it. It was, they were going through something very intense and very hard, of course, nowadays. It's still hard for people that are, for example, transforming or transitioning. And these objects were like a sort of emotional support, or like these stories. It's not, I call them objects because I'm very image centered, but they're stories. And this is, it could be very interesting also for women that are going through this. Myself, I was a teenager in Argentina. Abortion was illegal. So yeah, I remember having this feeling. What if I get pregnant and I don't want to have a? I know how it feels, and it's really hard to, yeah, for this people.
Yeah,
Don't know if there's like last question, because Jorge say that we are need to finish. Nice, so Rodri, if there are some more questions, but a bit quickly. Thank you.
Sorry, hopefully that could be still heard online. Thank you so much for really interesting insights, the things that I sort of didn't really know enough about, quite frankly. Laura, one towards you. I work on a couple of sort of feminist authors and cartoonists in the Canary Islands, especially in Spain, and obviously there's been a huge resurgence in redefining femininity in that context. And sort of one of the questions I had on the back of that is also, how do these authors, especially and these creators, sort of circulate transnationally? Do they engage with discourses transregionally across Latin America, across, say, up to the States, for example, or transatlantically or transpacifically? Do you find those circulations also exist? Where do they locate themselves within those conversations, if they do at all? It's just a really interesting thing, sort of wondering what the perspective was.
Thank you for the question. It's a very interesting one. Yeah, there is a circulation, of course. It's the same as comics in general, without the gender differentiation or whatever. Inside Latin America, there's a lot of circulation because the events, with social media, it's so easy because we were quite, it was quite fragmented 20 years ago, for example. And now it's much more fluid, of course. So inside Latin America, there's a lot of it's very strong, and that's how the movement with this green scarf movement went from the south to the north of Mexico, or the entire continent. So they circulate in different events and in social media, and some of them are sort of there is this thing that some of them do, like, I don't know, with the United States, I don't know, North America, I don't know how it works. I really ignore it. But with Europe, I know that people like me, we bring things, we do this sort of agent of bringing things here, materially and symbolically. And also the events like Angoulême Festival, there is a channel from different countries in South America to show their work in here, and some of them are publishing here now in established publishing houses. I know more in what happens in France, but yeah, in France there's a lot of these authors that I showed that are being publishing in France, in French. And the Feminietas, the journal, it was born like in the two continents. This one it was created in Catalonia, because the main editor is Catalonia, but she is also bringing a lot of artists from Latin America. So these are very interesting situation, and it's yeah, I try to do it myself as much as I can. I go into festivals. That it's all of this is I don't want to talk about myself, but all of this is activism. It's really like it's militancia. We don't get paid for this, but it's a lot of people that want to do it because we feel like we don't want to. I think we can choose to do it. It's like it's happening. Yeah.
So I think that we are not any more questions. Thank you again to Laura and Mel